My parents ignored me all my life, while my sister got everything: attention, love, and money for college, but that wasn't enough. I was furious when sabotaged my wedding. I couldn't take it and said, "Hi, Reddit. I've been lurking here for a while, and honestly, this feels like the only place where I can finally get all of this off my chest. It's been eating away at me for years, and I need to say it out loud. I grew up in a family where favoritism wasn't just some subtle thing, it was right there, out in the open, impossible to ignore. And guess who got the short end of the stick?
Me.
My older sister, Rachel, was what you'd call the golden child. My parents adored her, doted on her every move, celebrated every win, and even defended her screw-ups.
And me.
I was Emma, the one who seemed to exist in the background, wondering if I'd ever manage to earn even half of the attention she got. I think I started noticing how different things were when I was about 5. The memory is still crystal clear. It was my 5th birthday, and I'd been so excited because I'd spent weeks begging for a chocolate cake. To my little kid brain, it was supposed to be the biggest deal. But when the day finally arrived, my mom walked into the room with a strawberry shortcake. "Rachel doesn't like chocolate," she said with a smile, like that was the most logical thing in the world. Rachel wasn't even there. This was my birthday, but somehow it still revolved around her. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem ungrateful, but inside, it hurt. It made me feel like I didn't matter. That sort of thing happened all the time. Holidays were the worst. One Christmas, Rachel got a shiny new bike with this big pink bow on it, and I remember just staring at it, wishing I could have something like that. Then I unwrapped my big gift, a second-hand board game. Half the pieces were missing. My dad laughed it off with a casual, "Hey, it's the thought that counts." But whose thought was that? It sure as hell wasn't mine. School wasn't any better. Rachel was the classic overachiever, straight as, captain of the cheer squad, the girl who could charm anyone with her perfect blonde hair and dazzling smile. My parents lived for her achievements. It was always, "Rachel won another award," or "Rachel's teacher says she's a natural leader." Meanwhile, I was just trying to make it through the day without melting down over math homework. I was good at art. I loved to draw, and it felt like the one thing I could do well. One time, I spent weeks on this painting for school and brought it home, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd notice. My mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice, honey. But don't forget, Rachel's recital is tomorrow. Make sure you cheer for her." It was like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. I couldn't even come close to breaking through the wall of their love and attention that was reserved just for Rachel. And it wasn't just about feelings. The favoritism carried over into everything, including money. When Rachel turned 16, my parents threw her an extravagant Sweet 16 party at this swanky venue downtown. They went all out. There was a DJ, a professional photographer, a custom cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and even a party planner to make sure everything was perfect. The room was packed with at least 100 guests, and there were balloons spelling out her name in gold letters. I stood in the corner of that sparkling ballroom, watching Rachel twirl around in her glittering dress, wondering, will I ever get something like this? 2 years later, I got my answer. When I turned 16, my party was a family dinner at a local diner. They called it a celebration, but it felt more like an afterthought. I got a generic birthday card with $20 inside, and my dad joked, "Don't spend it all in one place." That night, something in me shifted. I stopped expecting anything. It wasn't just about the lack of parties or gifts, though. It was the constant reminder that no matter what I did, I was always falling short. My parents always had an excuse ready. "Rachel's older, so she needs more attention," or "Rachel works so hard, you should take notes." It didn't matter how much effort I put into anything. When I got my first job at 15, they barely acknowledged it. But when Rachel landed her first internship, they threw a dinner party to celebrate. The worst was a family trip to Disney World. I had been dreaming of going for years, seeing the castle, riding the rides, meeting the characters. But as soon as we arrived, the entire trip revolved around Rachel. She wanted to meet the princesses, so we spent hours standing in those endless lines. She wanted to go shopping, so we skipped rides to browse overpriced souvenir stores. When I finally worked up the courage to say I wanted to go on Space Mountain, my mom immediately shut me down. "Rachel gets motion sickness. We're not doing that." I ended up sitting on a bench by myself while Rachel had an impromptu photo shoot in front of the castle. That trip broke me. One night, I couldn't hold it in anymore and asked my mom why Rachel always got to come first. Her answer: "You're just too sensitive, Emma. Rachel's older and more mature. You'll understand when you're older." That crushed me. I wasn't being sensitive, I just wanted to feel like I mattered. The final straw came during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted into an art program at a local college. It wasn't a big-name school, but I was incredibly proud. I had worked so hard to get in. I told my parents, hoping for just a shred of excitement. Instead, my dad brushed it off with, "That's nice, but have you seen the scholarship Rachel got for her business degree? You should aim higher like her." It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Then came graduation. When Rachel graduated, my parents threw her a huge celebration. They had catered food, elaborate decorations, and even a slideshow of her accomplishments. When I graduated, we had pizza in the living room. No balloons, no speeches, no fanfare. That's when I realized I would never be Rachel. And in their eyes, that meant I would never be enough. Hi, Reddit. I wrote about my childhood before, and now I'm back to share what my teenage years were like. If my childhood felt like I was invisible, my adolescence was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. My sister, Rachel, was 4 years older than me and had always been the golden child. But when her perfect world started to crumble, she made it her mission to make mine unbearable. Rachel's downfall began when she was 15. She'd always been the queen bee at school, surrounded by a clique of friends who hung on her every word. But then rumors started spreading about her, something about cheating on a test and lying to get another girl suspended. I never knew all the details, but whatever happened, it changed everything. Rachel went from being the girl everyone admired to the girl everyone gossiped about. And when her popularity evaporated, her anger had nowhere to go, except straight at me. If Rachel had been mean before, it was nothing compared to what came next. She started blaming me for everything. If something went missing in the house, Rachel would claim, "Emma probably took it." If she got in trouble, she'd twist the story to make me the scapegoat. And of course, my parents bought it. "Rachel's going through a hard time," my mom would say. "Be patient with her." Her words were bad enough, but her bullying wasn't just verbal. One day, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when Rachel stormed in, snatched the plate out of my hands, and hurled it into the sink. "You don't need to eat so much," she sneered. I froze, humiliated. I wasn't even overweight, but Rachel knew exactly how to cut deep. And she didn't stop there. Rachel started weaponizing her loneliness, inviting the few friends she had left over to the house, not to hang out, but to torment me. At first, it was subtle. They'd make snide comments about my clothes or smirk when I entered the room. But it quickly escalated. One day, I came home from school to find Rachel and her friends lounging in the living room. As soon as I walked in, they burst out laughing. "Nice shoes, Emma," one of them said, grinning. I glanced down, confused. I was just wearing my plain sneakers, nothing weird about them. Then I noticed it. They'd stuck pieces of tape on the back with the word "loser" written on them. I wanted to disappear. I tried telling my parents about it, desperate for some kind of support, but they just brushed it off. "Teenagers can be mean," my dad said. "Just ignore them." But how do you ignore it when the bullying happens in your own home? The worst part was Rachel's relentless effort to convince me I deserved it. "You're so pathetic," she'd say. "No wonder nobody likes you." After a while, I started to believe her. I stopped trying to make friends at school because I assumed everyone would hate me, just like Rachel did. Instead, I spent most of my time alone in my room, either drawing or reading, anything to escape reality. The only bright spot in my life was my cousins, Sarah and Ben. They lived about 50 miles away, so I didn't get to see them often, but when I did, it was like a breath of fresh air. Sarah was a year older than me, and Ben was 2 years younger. Unlike my family, they didn't treat me like an afterthought or a punching bag. They treated me like I mattered. I'll never forget one weekend when my parents let me stay with them. I'd had a particularly awful week with Rachel and was dreading going home. Somehow, Sarah seemed to sense it. She pulled me aside and said, "You don't have to listen to her, you know. You're amazing just the way you are." I burst into tears. No one had ever said something like that to me before. For once, I felt seen. But those weekends were rare, and most of the time, I was stuck in the daily hell of living with Rachel. Her bullying only got worse as she got older. When she got her driver's license, it became another tool to torment me. She'd tell my parents she was giving me a ride to school, but once we got in the car, she'd make me wait while she picked up her friends. The entire ride, they'd laugh at me, whispering insults just loud enough for me to hear. And if I dared to complain, Rachel would threaten to dump me on the side of the road. One time, she actually did. We were driving home from school, and I made the mistake of asking her to turn the music down. She slammed on the brakes, glared at me, and yelled, "Get out!" I thought she was bluffing, so I stayed put. Big mistake. Rachel opened the door, grabbed me by the arm, and shoved me out onto the sidewalk. I had to walk 2 miles home. When I finally got there, sweaty and exhausted, my mom was furious, but not at Rachel. "Why can't you just get along with your sister?" she shouted. I didn't even bother explaining. What was the point? By the time I was 15, I felt completely numb. I went through the motions at school, avoided Rachel as much as possible, and stopped hoping for anything better. But the constant bullying took its toll. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night, unable to breathe. I didn't tell anyone because I knew they wouldn't care. One night, I was sitting in my room when Rachel barged in with her friends. They'd been drinking, something my parents conveniently ignored, and decided it would be hilarious to go through my stuff. They dumped my backpack out onto the floor, scattering my sketchbooks and school supplies everywhere. One of them picked up a drawing I'd been working on for weeks. It was something I was really proud of, but she ripped it in half with a fake, wide-eyed oops and a smirk. I felt like I was going to explode. I couldn't take it anymore. Without saying a word, I ran out of the house and didn't stop until I reached the park down the street. I collapsed onto a bench, shaking and crying so hard I could barely breathe. It felt like I was breaking apart, piece by piece, and no one even noticed. Wondering how I was going to survive another day in that house. That night at the park, I made a decision. If no one else was going to stand up for me, I had to do it myself. The next morning, after Rachel and her friends had left, I went straight to my parents. I told them everything. The bullying, the name-calling, the times Rachel had physically hurt me. I even held up my torn-up drawing as proof. I was shaking, desperate for them to finally understand. My mom just sighed and said, "You need to learn to stand up to her. She's your sister, Emma. She doesn't mean it." That was the moment I realized I was truly on my own. Hi, Reddit. I've shared parts of my story before, but today I want to talk about the blatant favoritism and unfair treatment I endured growing up. If my childhood was defined by being ignored and my teenage years by relentless bullying, my young adulthood was a masterclass in outright double standards. The kind of double standards so glaring, they'd be funny if they weren't so painful. Rachel always got more than I did. More attention, more praise, more everything. But as we got older, the gap only widened. When Rachel turned 16, she started getting $300 a month in pocket money. I remember overhearing my parents talking about it one night. "It's important for her to have spending money," my mom said. "She's social, and we don't want her to feel left out." I couldn't believe it. Rachel got $300 to hang out with her friends, while I was stuck with $50, a sum that barely covered school lunches, let alone anything else. By the time I turned 18, I thought things might change. I was legally an adult, after all. I had been working part-time for over a year, saving every penny for college. I figured asking for a little more pocket money wasn't unreasonable. When I brought it up, my dad scoffed. "You don't need that much. You're not like Rachel. You don't go out much anyway." The message was clear. I wasn't worth the investment. Then there was the issue of curfews, another constant source of frustration. By the time Rachel was 17, she could stay out as late as she wanted. I remember one night when she stumbled home at 2 a.m., reeking of alcohol. My mom didn't even flinch. "Teenagers experiment," she said, brushing it off. But when I asked if I could stay out until 10 p.m. for a school event, the answer was a flat-out no. "You need to be home by 9, my dad said. "It's not safe for you to be out late." When I turned 18, I decided I'd had enough. "I'm an adult now," I told them. "Why can't I have the same curfew Rachel did?" My mom gave me one of those condescending smiles that made my blood boil. It's different for girls like you, Emma. Rachel's more independent. The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. Independent? I'd been taking care of myself, and half the house, for years while Rachel couldn't even be bothered to clean up after herself. Myself for years while Rachel couldn't even manage to do her own laundry. The academic double standard was possibly the most infuriating part of all. I had always done well in school, graduating in the top 5% of my class, earning multiple scholarships, and even securing a spot in the honors program at a prestigious university. But when I accomplished something, my parents barely blinked. "It's expected," my mom would say with a shrug. "You're smart, of course you do well." Rachel, on the other hand, scraped by academically. I'll never forget the time she brought home a report card littered with CS and DS. Instead of disappointment, my parents threw her a celebratory dinner. "You've been working so hard," my dad said, beaming with pride. I wanted to scream. Just a week earlier, I had won a statewide art competition, and they hadn't even mentioned it. The disparity extended beyond academics. When Rachel got her first job as a receptionist at a local salon, my parents acted like she'd been hired as the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. "We're so proud of you," they gushed, practically throwing a parade in her honor. When I started working part-time at a bookstore, my mom barely acknowledged it. "Make sure it doesn't distract you from your studies," she said flatly. No praise. No excitement. Just another reminder that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. Things finally came to a head when I was 19. I had just finished my first year of college and was home for the summer. Rachel was also living at home, having dropped out of community college after just one semester. One evening at dinner, my mom casually announced that she and my dad were giving Rachel $5,000 to help her get back on her feet. I nearly choked on my food. "What about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm working 2 jobs to pay for school, and I haven't gotten a dime from you." My dad waved me off, completely unfazed. "You're doing fine on your own, Emma. Rachel needs more support right now." That was it. That was the last straw. I stood up, my hands shaking with anger. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I demanded. "Rachel gets everything handed to her, and I'm the one who has to struggle. How is that fair?" My mom didn't even flinch. Her response was as dismissive as ever. "Life isn't fair, Emma. You should be grateful for what you have." Desperate for some kind of validation, I turned to my extended family, hoping they'd see how unfair it all was. But even that backfired. My Aunt Lisa, who'd always been close to my mom, brushed me off just like they did. "You're being ungrateful," she said. "Your parents are doing their best. Rachel's just going through a rough patch. You should try to be more understanding." It felt like I was screaming into a void. No one seemed to care that I was being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. The only people who truly supported me were my friends, especially my roommate, Mia. She became my lifeline during that time, always ready to listen when I needed to vent. If it hadn't been for her and a few other close friends, I don't know how I would have kept going. I feel uncomfortable, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I tried to focus on studying, hoping Rachel would get bored and leave. She didn't. Instead, she stayed, finding excuses to hang around and inserting herself into our conversation. When Tyler finally left, I confronted Rachel. "What was that about?" I asked, my voice shaking. She smirked. "Relax, Emma. I was just being friendly. It's not my fault if he likes me better." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to believe Tyler wouldn't fall for her games, but a small, insecure part of me couldn't help wondering if she was right. A week later, my worst fears were confirmed. Tyler started acting distant, canceling plans, giving vague excuses, and barely responding to my messages. Then, one afternoon, I saw him and Rachel together. She was laughing, her hand casually resting on his arm. My heart sank. That night, Tyler called and confessed. He said Rachel had been texting him and that she'd convinced him they had a connection. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, sounding guilty but not nearly enough. "She's just different, you know?" I hung up, numb. It wasn't just the heartbreak, it was the realization that Rachel would always find a way to take what little happiness I had. When I confronted her, she didn't even bother denying it. "You should have seen this coming," she said with a shrug. "It's not my fault he chose me. That wasn't the last time Rachel interfered in my relationships. Every time I started seeing someone new, she'd find a way to insert herself into the picture. She'd flirt, spread rumors, or make snide comments about me when I wasn't around. One boyfriend broke up with me after Rachel told him I was too clingy and had a lot of issues. It got to the point where I stopped telling her, or anyone in my family, about my dating life. I didn't want to give her the chance to ruin it again. But the damage was done. Rachel's sabotage left me questioning whether I could ever trust anyone. Every time someone showed interest in me, I couldn't help but wonder if they'd eventually fall for her charms or believe her lies. The worst part? My parents never stepped in. When I tried to tell them what she was doing, they brushed it off as sibling rivalry. "Rachel's just teasing," my mom said. "Don't take it so personally." It felt like I was fighting a losing battle on all fronts. The favoritism, the bullying, and now the sabotage of my relationships. It was all too much. The only solace I found was in my friends, especially Mia. She was the first person who truly validated my feelings. "Your parents are messed up," she said bluntly after I poured my heart out to her. "You don't owe them anything, Emma. Focus on yourself." Her words were like a lifeline. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe I did deserve better. The breaking point came after Thanksgiving dinner. We were all sitting in the living room, relaxing after the meal. Alex and I were on the couch, and for once, Rachel wasn't hovering. I thought maybe I could finally breathe. But then Rachel walked in with a mischievous smile and 2 glasses of wine. "Alex," she said, handing him a glass, "I thought we could have a little toast. You know, get to know each other better." Before Alex could respond, she plopped down right next to him, effectively pushing me aside. "So," she said, leaning in close, "tell me more about yourself. Emma barely talks about you." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool. Alex, ever the gentleman, gave polite answers, but I could see how uncomfortable he was. When Rachel reached out to brush a non-existent piece of lint off his shirt, I couldn't take it anymore. "Rachel," I said, my voice tight, "can you give us some space?" She turned to me with an exaggerated pout. "What? I'm just being friendly. Don't be so sensitive, Emma." Alex, bless him, finally stepped in. "Actually, Rachel, I was hoping to finish talking to Emma about something important," he said firmly. "Maybe another time." The look on her face was priceless. She muttered something under her breath and left the room, but the damage had already been done. Later that night, Alex and I went for a walk. He held my hand as we strolled down the quiet street, but I could tell something was on his mind. Finally, he stopped and turned to me. "Emma," he said gently, "I really like you. But your sister," he trailed off, searching for the right words. "She makes it hard." Tears stung my eyes. "I know," I whispered. "She does this to everyone." Alex sighed. "I don't want to hurt you, but I need to be honest. If we're going to make this work, I need to know you're willing to set boundaries with her." Hearing him say that broke my heart, not because he was wrong, but because I knew how hard it would be to enforce those boundaries in a family that refused to hold Rachel accountable. When we got back to the house, Rachel was waiting in the kitchen with our mom. As soon as she saw us, she smirked. "Back already? I thought you'd be out longer." "Rachel," I said, taking a deep breath, "I need to talk to you." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh. About what?" "About you respecting my relationships," I said firmly. "I'm serious. This has to stop." My mom immediately jumped in. "Emma, don't make a scene. Rachel was just being friendly." "Friendly?" I snapped. "She's been flirting with Alex since we walked in the door." Rachel feigned innocence. "Wow, paranoid much? Maybe you should work on your insecurity, Emma." That was the last straw. "You're not going to ruin this for me," I said, my voice shaking. "Stay out of my business." Alex and I made it through that weekend, but it wasn't easy. Rachel continued her antics, though Alex handled it like a champ. After we left, he told me he was proud of me for standing up to her. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step toward taking control of my own life. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to let Rachel's behavior dictate my happiness. I still had a long way to go, but with Alex by my side, I started to believe I could build a life that was mine, not hers to sabotage. World had stopped to celebrate her. My parents threw her a lavish party with catering, decorations, and a slideshow of all her achievements. It didn't matter that she barely graduated or that her grades were a mix of CS and DS. "We're just so proud of her," my mom gushed, as if scraping by was something to celebrate. When it was my turn to graduate, the difference was painfully clear. There was no party, no decorations, and no slideshow. We ordered pizza, and my parents barely acknowledged the fact that I had graduated in the top 5% of my class and earned multiple scholarships. "Good job, Emma," my dad said offhandedly, like I'd just taken out the trash. The favoritism only grew more glaring as I prepared for college. Rachel had tried community college after high school but dropped out after one semester. Despite this, my parents still supported her financially, giving her money to figure things out while I worked 2 part-time jobs to save for school. When I told my parents I wanted to study abroad, a dream I'd been working toward for years, I thought they might finally be proud of me. Instead, my mom frowned. "How are you going to afford that?" she asked. "You should be saving your money for something practical." Meanwhile, Rachel announced she was going on a 2-week vacation to Mexico with her friends. My parents didn't just support her decision, they gave her extra money to cover the trip. When I pointed out the hypocrisy, my dad got defensive. "Rachel needs a break," he said. "You're the one who chose to study abroad. That's on you." It felt like a slap in the face. I had worked tirelessly to make that trip happen, sacrificing sleep and socializing to juggle work and school, and they couldn't even pretend to be happy for me. By the time I graduated college, I had all but given up on having a relationship with my parents. They didn't even come to my graduation ceremony, claiming they were too busy. This was the same family that had thrown Rachel a massive party for barely graduating high school. The final betrayal came when I started applying to graduate programs. I'd been accepted into a competitive program that required me to relocate. When I told my parents, hoping for a shred of excitement, my mom sighed. "Why would you move so far away? Rachel still needs help, and you're going to abandon her." Abandon her? Rachel, the golden child who had never lifted a finger to help me? That conversation was a turning point. I realized I couldn't keep chasing validation from people who refused to see me. My education was my escape, and I clung to it like a lifeline. I used every ounce of the resilience I'd built up over the years to push forward, despite the lack of support. The road hasn't been easy, but I've learned that I don't need their approval to succeed. My achievements might not have been celebrated by my family, but they're mine, and that's enough. She weren't going to support me, I'd support myself. That night had been a breaking point, but it also ignited something in me, a determination to prove that I didn't need their help to achieve my dreams. I threw myself into my studies and extracurriculars with renewed focus, determined to make my college applications stand out. I researched scholarships obsessively, applying for every single one I qualified for, no matter how small. I spent weekends working part-time jobs to save up money, knowing every dollar would count. Meanwhile, Rachel's college experience was exactly what you'd expect. My parents visited her almost every weekend, bringing groceries, buying her new clothes, and taking her out to fancy dinners. When she struggled with her coursework, they hired tutors without a second thought. "We want her to succeed," my dad said, as if that wasn't something every child deserved. I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast when I finally started my own college journey. I had earned a spot at a highly competitive university with a partial scholarship, but I still had to take out loans and work part-time to cover the rest. My parents didn't offer to help, not even a little. They didn't even come to my freshman orientation. The most painful part wasn't the financial burden, it was the lack of acknowledgement. While my parents bragged about Rachel's accomplishments to anyone who would listen, they barely mentioned my acceptance to a top-tier school. When they did, it was usually accompanied by a dismissive comment like, "Well, Emma's always been good at school." It's no surprise. One particularly bitter moment came during my sophomore year. I had just won a prestigious design competition, earning both a cash prize and national recognition. I was so excited to tell my parents, hoping they might finally be proud of me. When I called to share the news, my mom barely reacted. "That's nice, honey," she said. "Did you hear Rachel's thinking about switching majors? She's been under so much stress lately." It was like a punch to the gut. I had just achieved something incredible, something I'd worked so hard for, and they couldn't even muster a shred of enthusiasm. All they cared about was Rachel and her endless cycle of indecision and mediocrity. That was the moment I stopped seeking their approval. I realized I'd been chasing something I was never going to get, a fair share of their love and support. From that point on, I focused on building the life I wanted, one step at a time. Looking back, I can't say it was easy, but I can say it was worth it. Every accomplishment, every milestone, was mine and mine alone. And while my parents might never recognize my efforts, I've learned to take pride in them anyway. Rachel might have had everything handed to her, but I've built my success from the ground up. And that's something no one, not even her, can take away from me. Equally dismissive. Well, it's a good start, she said, her tone devoid of enthusiasm. But you'll still need to figure out how to cover the rest of the costs. I stood there, clutching the letter, my excitement deflating like a balloon with a slow leak. I had just achieved something incredible, something I had worked so hard for, and they couldn't even muster genuine pride. Meanwhile, Rachel was still the center of their universe. She had recently switched majors for the third time, and my parents treated it like some grand epiphany. She's really finding her passion, my mom said one evening, as if Rachel's constant indecision was a sign of brilliance rather than laziness. Even after Rachel flunked out of her second semester, they continued to support her unconditionally. They paid for her to retake classes, bought her a new laptop to help her focus, and even covered her rent when she decided she needed a change of scenery and moved off campus. I kept my head down and focused on preparing for the next chapter of my life. With my scholarship and savings from years of part-time jobs, I knew I could make it work, even without my parents' help. Mrs. Turner, my guidance counselor, was my saving grace. She celebrated every acceptance letter with me, offering the encouragement my parents never gave. "You're going to do amazing things, Emma," she said one afternoon, beaming with pride. When the time came to leave for college, I packed up my things with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally acknowledge how far I'd come. But on the day I left, their indifference was palpable. "Drive safe," my dad said, patting me on the shoulder before retreating back to the living room. My mom barely looked up from her phone. "Don't forget to call," she said flatly, as if I were heading to a friend's house for the weekend instead of starting a whole new chapter of my life. The contrast between their treatment of Rachel and me had never been clearer. When Rachel went to college, they practically moved heaven and earth to make sure she had everything she needed. For me, it was as though they couldn't care less. As I drove away, a mixture of relief and sadness washed over me. I was finally free to chase my dreams, but the realization that I couldn't count on my parents to share in my joy or support my journey was a bitter pill to swallow. That scholarship wasn't just a ticket to a brighter future, it was proof that I could succeed without their help. And while their lack of support still stung, I promised myself I would never let it hold me back. She squeezed my hand gently, a silent reminder to stay calm. "It's not about who gets married first, it's about us starting our life together." Rachel shrugged, her smirk never fading. "I'm just saying, don't you think it's a little weird? Like, shouldn't the older siblings set the tone? It's tradition, after all." My mom, instead of shutting her down, chimed in. "Well, Rachel does have a point. But we're happy for you, Emma." "Really?" I felt my stomach twist. Jake, ever the peacemaker, smiled and said, "We're excited, and we hope you'll all celebrate with us." But Rachel wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, she found every opportunity to undermine our engagement. When we started planning the wedding, she constantly made snide comments. "A summer wedding? That's so basic," she said once, rolling her eyes. "Another time," she told me, "you should probably keep things small. It's not like you're the type to pull off anything grand." My parents, as usual, didn't intervene. In fact, they seemed more concerned with Rachel's feelings than my happiness. "You know how Rachel gets," my mom said one day after I vented about her behavior. "She just wants to feel included." "Included?" I snapped. "This isn't about her. It's about Jake and me." My mom just sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Things came to a head at my bridal shower. It was a small, intimate gathering hosted by my best friend, Mia. Everything was perfect, until Rachel arrived. She showed up late, wearing a floor-length white dress. The room went silent when she walked in. I could feel the tension as everyone exchanged awkward glances. "Rachel," I said, trying to keep my composure, "you do realize this is my bridal shower, right? And that you're wearing white?" She looked at me with faux innocence. "Oh, I didn't even think about it. But it's not like it's your wedding day, so what's the big deal?" The rest of the event was overshadowed by her antics, loudly one-upping any story I told, monopolizing conversations, and making passive-aggressive comments about marriage. By the end of the day, I was emotionally drained. Jake could see how much it was affecting me. "Emma," he said later that night, "I love you, but you've got to set some boundaries with your family. This is our wedding, not theirs. Don't let them ruin it." He was right. For years, I had let Rachel and my parents' behavior dictate how I felt. But not this time. This time, I was determined to stand my ground. When Rachel tried to insert herself into the wedding planning, offering unsolicited advice, criticizing my choices, and even suggesting she be my maid of honor, I put my foot down. "Rachel," I said firmly, "this is my day. If you can't be supportive, then maybe you shouldn't be involved." Predictably, she ran to my parents, who immediately called to lecture me. "She's your sister, Emma," my mom said. "You can't just exclude her." "I'm not excluding her," I replied, my voice steady but resolute. "But I'm not letting her take over, either. This is my wedding, and I'm done letting her make everything about her." The day of the wedding finally arrived, and I braced myself for potential drama. But to my surprise, Rachel stayed relatively quiet, likely because she saw that I wasn't backing down. The ceremony was beautiful, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me and Jake. As Jake and I danced at the reception, I realized something important. I didn't need my parents' or Rachel's approval to be happy. This was my life, my love, and my joy. Taking a stand hadn't been easy, but it was worth it. For the first time, I felt free to live my life without their constant shadow hanging over me. And as I looked into Jake's eyes, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Rachel's tantrum grew louder. I could feel the tension rising in the bridal suite as my bridesmaids exchanged uneasy glances. This was supposed to be my day, the one moment where I could celebrate love and happiness without my family's drama overshadowing everything. But of course, Rachel couldn't let that happen. Jake, ever the calm and steady presence, came into the suite after hearing the commotion. "Emma," he said softly, "do you want me to handle this?" I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I don't want her ruining this for us," I whispered. Jake kissed my forehead and left to join Marcus outside. Through the window, I watched as he calmly but firmly addressed my parents and Rachel. "This is Emma and my wedding," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "We've made it clear that Rachel's behavior is not welcome here. If she refuses to leave, we'll have no choice but to call the authorities." Rachel, who was still clutching her bouquet like she was about to walk down the aisle herself, burst into tears. "You're all so unfair," she wailed. "I'm just trying to be part of the day." My mom, ever the enabler, turned to Jake. "Don't you think you're overreacting? She's your sister-in-law, for goodness sake. This is a family event." Jake didn't budge. "It's not up for debate," he said firmly. "She can leave on her own, or she can be escorted out. The choice is hers." Marcus, who looked more than ready to do the escorting, crossed his arms and gave Rachel a pointed look. Finally realizing she wasn't going to win this one, Rachel let out an ear-piercing scream and stormed off. My mom followed her, still yelling about how we were tearing the family apart. When Jake returned to the suite, he gave me a reassuring smile. "She's gone," he said. "You don't have to worry about her anymore." I took a deep breath, letting the relief wash over me. "Thank you," I said, pulling him into a hug. The rest of the day was everything I had hoped for. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and joy, and our guests were incredibly supportive. They could see the lengths we'd gone to protect our day, and many came up to me afterward to say how much they admired my strength in dealing with my family. Rachel didn't come to the reception, which was probably for the best. My parents sulked in a corner for most of the night, clearly upset that their golden child had been shut out. But I didn't let it bother me. For the first time, I felt free to enjoy a moment that was entirely mine. As Jake and I shared our first dance, I looked around the room, filled with friends and family who truly cared about us, and felt a deep sense of peace. Rachel hadn't won. My parents hadn't won. This day belonged to Jake and me, and nothing could take that away. That night, as we left for our honeymoon, I realized something important. Standing up for myself wasn't just about protecting my wedding day. It was about reclaiming my life. And with Jake by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. Several guests came up to me during the reception, expressing their shock and outright disapproval of Rachel's behavior. "She's out of control," one of Jake's aunts said, shaking her head. "You're doing the right thing standing your ground." With the support of our guests and the security team standing firm, Rachel and my parents eventually gave up and left in a huff. I was shaken, but I refused to let them ruin my day. Jake held my hand and looked me in the eyes. "This is about us," he said gently. "No one else matters." The ceremony went off without a hitch. As I walked down the aisle, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported us, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy. For the first time in my life, I was the one in the spotlight, not Rachel, and it felt incredible. The reception was just as magical. We danced, laughed, and celebrated with our friends and family. Jake's mom, who had been an unwavering source of support throughout the wedding planning process, gave a heartfelt speech about love and resilience. Her words brought tears to my eyes. It was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. But, of course, Rachel couldn't let it go. The day after the wedding, she started spreading rumors that Jake had been unfaithful. She even sent me screenshots of obviously fake text messages, claiming they were proof. Jake and I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "She's really grasping at straws now," he said, shaking his head. The rumors didn't stick. Everyone who knew us could see right through Rachel's lies. Her desperate attempts to sabotage our happiness only made her look foolish and petty. My parents, predictably, tried to defend her. "She's just upset," my mom said, as if that justified her actions. "You need to forgive her." But I was done. The wedding was a turning point for me, a moment where I realized I didn't need their approval or validation to be happy. I had Jake, a loving husband who supported me unconditionally, and that was enough. After the wedding, Jake and I made the decision to keep our distance from my family. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time, I felt free from the constant drama and toxicity that had overshadowed my life for so long. Our honeymoon in Italy was the perfect escape. We explored the countryside, indulged in delicious food and wine, and soaked in the beauty of the world around us. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the family scapegoat anymore. I was just Emma, living my best life with the man I loved. And that, I realized, was more than enough.